Have you wondered about the origins of the universe, or ever questioned where everything came from? Keep watching to see scholars debate this topic along the lines of atheism and Christianity.
One of the points you made was that you were enthralled by the universe and the concept of God because you can see that it provides an explanation of the rationality of the universe.
That's right.
Now, in the book I just published last year, which you alluded to, where I talk about the origin of the laws of nature, which I think is kind of behind your comfort, as it were.
Well,
I use 4 principles to argue, to identify the laws of the origin of the laws of nature. One principle is indolence, another is anarchy, and another is ignorance. There's three principles. And I can show, and I do in that book, that those 3 principles are enough to account for the laws of nature as we have identified them. I don't need an agent behind it, unless that agent is infinitely indolent, is infinitely anarchic, or is infinitely ignorant, which I don't think you would ascribe qualities, those qualities to your God. So I don't need a God to account for this world.
We obviously don't have time to go into the fullness of what you wrote in that book, but the phrase that really struck me from the book was this: you said on a few occasions, nothing rolled over into something. That was the way in which the universe, which is clearly something, came from nothing. Now, this was referenced by you earlier, John.
Well, it sounds like nonsense to me. And you know, Peter, what do you mean by nothing in that context?
I mean the absence of space-time.
Or do you mean what most of us mean, the absence of anything?
That's what I mean what I said.
Okay, right. Well, I'm very interested in nothing. In fact, I give lectures on nothing these days.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to enter a discussion like this in the Harvard MIT Faculty Club. And I was surrounded by the experts, Vilenkin and Alan Guth, probably the world's most famous cosmologist. And I did something I never usually do. I said I'd like to ask the first question of Alan Guth, who's the father of the theory of inflation and all this kind of stuff. I had a very friendly discussion. So I said, Alan, look, there's much ado about nothing. And I want to ask you a question. When you, as a cosmologist, use the word nothing, do you mean what all the rest of us mean as absence of anything? He said, no, we do not.
Well, he was wrong. He should. Because presumably, if there was a creation, let's try to talk in your kind of language. If there was a creation, then presumably the something that we now experience was preceded by the absence of something. And I presume that we can call the absence of something or the absence of anything nothing. So presumably at the creation, somehow or other, absolutely nothing changed into, I use the term rolled over, changed into something. Is that what
by
happened?
Principles of indolence and ignorance and...
No, those come later.
Oh, I see. I need to read this, you see, Peter. I'm sorry you catch me out.
But I think...
No, let me speak to the point.
Let me just finish. So presumably you think that if there was absolutely nothing and it turned into absolutely something, that there was an agent involved in causing that. Is that the creation?
I wouldn't quite put it that way.
I
would say that the universe comes from nothing physical, but it doesn't come from nothing. God is not nothing. In fact, we get the whole thing upside down. We tend to think, partly because of the way we're educated in terms of science, that mass energy and material is the basic stuff of the universe. Of course, now we've come down to nothing being the basic stuff. I would want to say about that is I don't believe it. But secondly, God is not physical. God is spirit. And the fundamental stuff in the universe is mind and spirit. It's not material. So then, if I could finish, the universe comes from nothing physical, but it doesn't come from nothing. It comes from God who created it. Let there be light, and there was light. And so that is my position.
And that's not a position which you believe conflicts with the science we do know of, the Big Bang?
Not at all. The Big Bang is wonderful because it simply tells us there was a beginning. And science caught up from the Bible, with the Bible in the 1960s, because science was tied to Aristotle for centuries, believing that there was an eternal universe. Now we believe in a beginning. Whether you mean a beginning of the multiverse or the universe, it doesn't really matter, because the latest mathematical theorems by Guth, the man I just mentioned, Vilenkin and Borde, say that there is an absolute beginning. So the Bible has said it for centuries.
Now, I think you're willing to grant this idea of an absolute beginning, Peter, but for you...
Cautiously.
Cautiously.
I mean, it could be that time is circular. And that we're just seeing a few billion years and it looks straight. But I'm prepared to accept that there might well have been a beginning.
But your view is that prior, well, if you can speak of being prior to, that there was nothing and the something came from nothing. Obviously, many people will say that sounds like a contradiction in terms.
Well, since we've got something and originally there was nothing, then I think it must be true. Right. That nothing turned into something. But what you've got to be very careful about is...
It's not a question of nothing turning into something. It's a question of a creator.
You see, what science does is to simplify questions till they get to the point that they stand open, perhaps, to being answered. And if you look at the universe as a whole, you can see that it actually consists, I think, and I'm prepared to be accepted on this, of equal amounts of opposites. Take, for example, electric charge. We know that there is positive charge in the universe. We know that there is negative charge in the universe. But we also know observationally, because of the great strength of the electromagnetic interaction compared to gravity, that if there had been any imbalance, were there any imbalance of the positive and negative amounts of electricity, then the universe would be blasted apart and would not have survived until now. So what we've got are positive and negative charges. And what I think happened is that when you have got absolutely nothing, of course, you've got no charge. But at the inception of the universe, that nothing separated into opposites, which accounts for why we've got equal amounts of positive and negative charge.
And what separated it?
Well, that's the second question. I think you can go on looking at other aspects of the universe, like the amount of energy that there is, and see that when you actually add up all the energy in the universe, it comes to zero. So, although it looks as though there's a lot of energy around, in fact, there are equal amounts of opposite kinds of energy. So, although I'm not claiming to know how the universe, how nothing separated into opposites, what I think it shows is that science has simplified the question. So instead of having to say, where did all the charges come from? Where did all the energy come from? All it's got to do now, and I admit that it has not yet done it, but it seems to me to be a simpler task, is to say, how did that absolutely nothing separate into opposites?
Well,
I just separated them.
Let's go to a final comment and then we'll go to some questions.
Well, I would say, Peter, forgive me for being very skeptical here, but I've come across this argument many times. It sounds to me that this is saying something like, because my credits equal my debts, there's nothing going on at all.
Yes, I am saying that.
Oh, I see.
And
okay.
I think it's a wonderful simplification prior to understanding the greatest question of all, which is why the universe exists.
What's your problem with putting it in these terms, though, John?
Well, because these charges, once they are around, are certainly not adding up to nothing. There's a whole system. Now, in my study...
But they're adding up to zero charge.
Oh yes, there's zero charge, but that isn't the only thing around. There's space-time around, there's everything else around.
Yeah.
But what I would like to say is, in my examination of what people believe nothing is, there's Stephen Hawking, there's Lawrence Krauss, and having read all of their books, I discover that the way they get something from nothing, they're not saying you're doing it, Peter, because I need to investigate your book, but is by redefining nothing, which is a very clever cop-out. Lawrence Krauss, on about page 5 of his book, A Universe from Nothing, says this: because something is physical, nothing must be physical, especially if you define it as the absence of something. Well, that's sheer nonsense.
Yeah, I think that's nonsense.
Oh, that's great.
Well, we've got some agreement.
Oh, that's very good.
It seems like Dr. Atkins had real trouble with understanding and even defining what nothing means. And we would assume, him being a chemist, and his viewpoint would be materialism, and that everything that exists must be only from material in nature. So for anyone to go back and say there was a time that material came into existence, it's hard for materialists to really say that there was nothing at all. But there must be, in that worldview, either material or no material, but there's nothing else in between. But what Dr. Lennox was talking about is actually there's a spiritual nature. There's more things than just material things. And this is the nature that God is. This is the nature that he actually created us as well. And we do experience this in our lives and in the world around us, that it's not just material. The experience is not just material. And there is more than that. And actually, through reasoning, we would get to the bottom of things, the end of things, and see it's not just materialism. That seems to be really the issue that Dr. Atkins was struggling with, is when he had to try and define that there is nothing. Another thing, his idea was that if there wasn't a beginning, then maybe time is just circular, which would just be infinite. And that's something. Time is something that's there. So it's just really interesting to be able to see these debates, and I hope everyone out there got something from that. If you enjoyed the channel, like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. God bless you.